Good morning, everybody. How are you? This is Enrique Sanchez of Spanish United. Today we have a very special guest. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience?
Uh, let's restart. What did you say?
I said that my name is Enrique Sanchez. I'm the founder director of Spanish United, and I have a very special guest. I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience. I was cueing
Oh,
you
okay,
as to the
okay.
audience.
Yeah, that's what I. Yeah, yeah. I just missed that part. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Jarmo Tarkki. I am pastor for the Finnish communities west of the Mississippi River, the whole region, including all of Mexico.
Awesome.
And so this is a area that is gigantic. There's probably a few 100,000 people who can trace their ancestors back to Finland. Some are third, some are fourth generation, but there's still about 60, 70,000 first generation Finns. Most of them are still Finnish citizens. So the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church has called me to minister to these people. And we have worship services in 9 different locations. We do various different services. Yesterday, we had a funeral in Los Angeles to a 101-year-old member of our congregation
Oh, wow.
who was born and raised in Finland, was helping during the Second World War when the Soviet Union was attacking Finland. And then eventually wound up in Hollywood and was a helper at for a number of movie stars and movie producers and directors. And so she was quite a remarkable person, had met all the, well, not all, but many of the great movie stars from Marilyn Monroe on. And she just happened to be at the very golden age in Hollywood. So the stories of many of the Finnish people who have come to America are quite incredible. And how did they eventually want, especially the older ones, the new ones like me would just take an airplane and we fly.
Mhm. So yeah, one of the reasons why I called you to the show because I started Spanish United about 2 years ago. It originally started as a movement helping primarily outreach for the homeless and people that have been destitute, that have been forgotten by the system, by society, but also as an organization that lobbies for Hispanic rights and social justice because Hispanics are the only minority group or ethnic group in the United States that doesn't have minority protections, primarily because Hispanics are not seen as a race, but as an ethnicity, because Hispanics could be of any race. And, it kind of falls like in a gray area in terms of protection. So when there are hate crimes or abuses towards Hispanic people, it's usually treated as a crime, but they don't put like a hate crime clause like when it's done against, African Americans, Jewish people, LGBT people, etc. And I'm trying to change that because, Hispanics, get a lot of abuse and a lot of Hispanics suffer in silence. So, I try to do what I can to advocate for people in the Hispanic community because the Hispanic community, they tend to be isolated when it comes to in the area of civil rights and even just representation in general because they are so large but yet they are invisible. So I'm just trying to reach out to the plight and to educate people that Hispanophobia is something that's very real. We have to address it. We cannot brush it under the carpet, as they say, and we have to do what we can to help the people. And from your interactions with the Hispanic community, how would you say the Finnish community, both Finnish Americans and Finnish people, like view or deal with Hispanics in general? Like, do they see them as foreigners as well as they are, or do they see them as, like a distant community. I just wanted to get your feedback on that.
Well, sure. Number one, Enrique, I think you are doing a very important work. I really respect and appreciate that. Um, what comes to mind is that there are, of course, various different kinds of Hispanic folks, recent immigrants, some of who don't speak much of English at all. Some of them speak fluent English. And then there are those Hispanics who were born and raised here, who might still speak Spanish at home, but whose language skills are as good as any, or even better than the Anglo folks. So when we talk about Hispanics, there are various different kinds, and the same way goes with all different ethnic groups. We have some older Finnish people who have immigrated from Finland, whose English language skills are rather limited. And then we have those immigrants, especially the most recent ones, who essentially speak totally fluent English. So that language barrier, I think, is perhaps the biggest hurdle, the one that many of the Finnish folks and Hispanics share as an experience. Of course, for the first generation Finns, as well as the first generation Hispanics who have immigrated, we're both immigrants. And it was a really interesting event happened in May when we met with our bishop in Los Angeles, Bishop Brenda Boss. We had the person who was in charge of foreign ministries from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Finland. And we had a meeting at the Finnish Consul General's official residence about the past, present, and future of Finnish ministry. And the Southwest California Synod, the bishop's office, is very much focused on immigration issues, on issues with various different minorities, particularly the Hispanics, but also Asians, African descent, and so on. And I think that this was probably one of the first times, or maybe the only time, when the bishop really began to think that, hey, there are other immigrants than Hispanics. And so here we have a smaller group, of course, but there is nonetheless a significant group of people who are all, for practical reasons, Lutherans, because as you, Enrique, know, Scandinavians are Lutherans.
Correct.
So it's in Lutheranism is the trademark after being Scandinavian and Lutheran.
Right.
It's hard pressed to find anybody else. But anyway, so that we do share that particular issue. Now, regarding discrimination and various different kinds of oppressive behaviors from the majority, I think that, again, here is the language issue. If you're a Finnish immigrant and your English skills are limited, I think that you're going to feel some discrimination. And I bet that happens with all immigrants. But once your language skills improve, you become more assimilated. And so I think for us in the Finnish community, I have emphasized this over and over again, that if you want to immigrate from Finland and you wish to become a citizen of the US, or wish to live and build a life for yourself in America, one of the first things you need to do is to become fluent in English. That's
Right.
a necessary thing. But then I have also said that for all of us here, especially in California, we should learn Spanish as well. We are, for all practical purposes, a bilingual state. Of course, there's, dozens of different languages, but the majority languages are clearly Spanish and English. And in some places, Spanish is the majority language.
Correct.
I don't know, you might, Enrique, know about this. I would still assume that English is the majority language in LA, but not by much, is it?
Right. I would say it's about 50-50. The majority of people in Los Angeles is English speaking, but I would say about 50 or 40% is Spanish speaking, and about maybe 25 or 30% is Spanish only.
Right.
Because Los Angeles, I would say it's about maybe like a 40% Hispanic and the rest is 50% different groups. But Spanish is a big influence. But again, I just feel that Hispanics in Los Angeles don't have the economic power as, for example, other minority groups do, like the Persian Jews, the Chinese community, the Korean community, and they are much smaller groups, but yet they have a lot of power to influence. So, one thing that I always say to my people is that there really is no point if we are a majority group if we don't have any power. We don't have either political or economic power, because you have different groups that, for example, they may have the political power, like the African American communities, or groups like the Koreans that have economic power, but they lack the political power. So Hispanics are the only group that they both lack both the political power and they lack the economic power. So that is
Yeah.
something that has to change, and primarily that has to change through education. A lot of Hispanics don't like to hear this, and I've received some criticism for it, but unfortunately, education is not ingrained in the culture of Hispanic people, regardless if they're born in the home countries or here. And it's like they cannot expect to move forward and break the cycle of poverty if they do not go to school. Like education is the passport to the future. It's like people cannot expect to be working a minimum wage job all their life and then pass that on as a career to their children. Like, that's not the way you have a better life. Like, many communities that are pre-industrial that have come from even worse backgrounds from Hispanic countries, for example, like Cambodia and maybe some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of them come from even worse conditions than Hispanic people, but within a generation they flourish and they're even living better than Hispanics that have been here for decades. And a lot of it has to do is because they emphasize education. Because when you know something, even if you don't have like the capital, like physical capital, if you have the knowledge, just knowledge is power. It opens doors to a lot of opportunities. And one things that I'm doing with my movement Spanish United is that I want to break that stigma that education or higher learning is only for rich people, for white people, and for Asian people. Like, why is it that everybody else can get an education? Hispanic people, they don't want to get an education, they run from it. It's like, I don't get it. But yet they complain, why are we poor? Why are we broke? Why are our youth going into gangs and making that into a career? And a lot of it has to do because of the lack of education. And
Mhm.
education is vital to a better future and to a better life. Like it's very important, the emphasis on education, because I feel that education and bettering one's economic situation are definitely intertwined. So I think it's very important that education is emphasized, in order for Hispanics to move forward.
Sure, sure. Um, but I would assume that Hispanics, as a group, of course, is a bit. I'm very careful about talking about people as a group, but
Sure.
for the purpose of this conversation, let's do it. Um, whenever we go to hotels, who's taking care of the who are doing the housekeeping there?
Hispanic people for the most part.
I would say that it's almost 100% Hispanic. Uh, so Hispanic people, in a sense, have a lot of power. What if all these housekeepers would go on strike?
Right.
I mean, that would be a huge thing. Now, I understand that because of the economics and so forth, striking is not cheap. And for people who need every penny to just simply to go from day to day, it is a major hurdle. But there is power that may be hidden in the Hispanic community, primarily. The Finnish community doesn't have anything like that. There's probably 4,000 Finns, first generation Finns in LA area. And how many
Mm,
Hispanics?
a lot.
Probably in the greater area, I would say millions. What would you say? 7, 8 million?
About.
Yeah. So by comparison to 4,000 Finns, 7 to 8 million Hispanics, I mean, you can't even talk about that during the same year.
Right, and that's the thing that I'm trying to do, that I'm trying to, emphasize and encourage Hispanics to speak on these issues because for some reason Hispanic people don't like to protest. Like, Hispanics tend to be very passive aggressive and they tend to get away from issues that are in their best interest. And the only way Hispanics are going to make reforms, because I don't believe in the word change, I believe in the word reform, because you could take reform like Martin Luther wanted to do with the Catholic Church. He didn't want to change the church, he wanted to reform it. So what I want to encourage Hispanics to do is that they want to make their lives better, they need to make reforms. And reforms is that they need to speak, they need to bring out these are the concerns, the social ills, that we have in our communities, and we need to brainstorm and find ways to resolve it. Let it be through education, let it be through economic investment, through establishment of community centers. Because Hispanic people, even though we are a big majority, we don't have a lot of services. We don't have a lot of community centers or cultural centers like other groups have. Like, for example, the Ukrainian community, they probably maybe a little bit bigger than the Finns here in LA, but they have a community center, they have cultural centers, they have services for their people, and they are a smaller community than Hispanic people. And
Yeah.
Hispanic people, they don't have those resources. And one thing that I've noticed that, when a Hispanic person becomes wealthy, instead of giving back to the community, they just leave, they forget, and they don't even care about what's happening in the community that they grew up in.
Yeah.
And yet for purposes of faith, maybe like once a year or two or so, when they have like a cultural event, they want to be, oh, I'm proud to be Hispanic. But when that ends, they want to go back into their suburbs, where there's, non-Hispanic people, and they even deny that they're Hispanic. And to me, I see that as being an oxymoron, because it's like, if one is gonna be proud of who they are, they also have to try to give back to the community. Because I see that with the Chinese community. The Chinese community, especially like in San Gabriel, like all those areas, I see that, they invest in their community and they give back. That's one of the reasons why you don't see that institutional poverty or the social problems you see in the Hispanic community, because they give back. And that's something that I'm trying to encourage Hispanic community to do, is that it's like we are seen as a stereotype that we just take and we don't give. So
Yeah.
it's like I'm trying to change that narrative, that if Hispanic people want to be seen as respectable citizens, they also have to give, and especially giving to their own people, because other communities, they give back to their own people, and Hispanics are the only people that don't really give back to their own people. So I think that that's something that really needs to be addressed and to be reformed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing, Enrique. You have been able to identify some of these key ingredients that would have to be solved to create a better life for the Hispanic members of the Hispanic community by and large. Um, but like I said, I think there's a lot of power that may be hidden. The other thing, I was just thinking about the service industries like housekeepers in hotels. But what about gardeners? I mean, Beverly Hills, if all the Hispanics would stop gardening, what would happen?
Right.
Uh, or let's say the farm workers. Let's say that the farm workers, which are almost 100% Hispanic, they would say, well, we are not going to work anymore. Uh, there is a lot of power in the Hispanic community. But I wanted to ask you a question. Number one, based on what I know from personal experience and what I hear from others, Hispanics have a very good reputation as being very hard workers.
Right.
And so the feeling about Hispanics, by and large, at least in the circles where I move, is very positive. I hardly ever hear anything negative about any more than any other group. In fact, vice versa, that Hispanics are really dedicated, hardworking people, and so there is something right there to build on. What I wanted to ask you is, and it seems to be that there is no great impulse in the Hispanic community to encourage, especially young people, to get a real education beyond high school and go to college and become lawyers and doctors and professors and so forth, where that would create really the power base then to go even further
Mhm.
and take also political action through which then the economic conditions may also change, so that the Hispanic community wouldn't be trapped at this level where they're. By the way, I got to emphasize this too. There's nothing wrong in being a housekeeper. There's nothing wrong in being a gardener. There's nothing wrong being a farm worker. Uh, Without these people, somebody has to do these jobs. There's no question about that. And I think that that kind of work is as important as is any other work.
Mhm.
But if almost 100% of the Hispanics are in these service industries and no place else, then yeah, you might have an issue. So um, maybe create some kind of balance there. I don't know. You know so much about this issue than I do. In the Finnish community, I have to say that the emphasis on education is very strong. It is expected that if you're a young person, after you graduate from high school, you go to university, college, and you graduate, and you go to a graduate school, and you get an academic job of one kind or another.
Mhm.
I mean, how many Finnish gardeners do you know, or farm workers? Zero, probably.
Right.
Of course, in Finland there are lots, but nonetheless. So, so, so the question that I have for you, and maybe for your audience, is: what do you think are the reasons why education is, from what I gather from what you say, is not as much encouraged as it may be in other communities?
I think part of it has to do is because many Hispanics they come from a peon culture. Latin America, as with, for example, like India, they have a social caste system or a caste system, meaning that depending on what caste you're born into, that's where you're going to be, and people have very little opportunities of moving up. And most of the Hispanics that immigrate to the United States or are descendants in the United States are usually people that come from the lower ends of that caste system, and it's a peon mentality that they don't see themselves bettering themselves other than just being what they're born into. So it's like even if you have an entire generation of people of a family that were peons, and let's say there is one that in the family that that has a talent, or let's say is gifted, and because there are gifted Hispanics, but that you don't really see it because the stereotype is that they don't want to do anything in life, is that the families tend to discourage it because they believe like it's a waste of time. You have Hispanics that are against their children getting an education prior other than just a basic education. It's like they see it as a waste of time and a waste of money. They don't see it as an investment. Like other communities, they treat education as an investment, while Hispanics they see it as a waste of money.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I can see that. And investment is by nature, you pay something now in order to get a return at a later time.
Exactly. That's how it is. But for some reason they don't see it that way, and they don't realize that they are hurting themselves.
Yeah.
And then, when they have a death in the family, or they have some type of issues, they're the ones that you see on the street corners doing car washes, because they don't have the money to pay for a funeral, but they don't have any problem spending 10 or 15 grand, or taking a second mortgage on their house to pay for a quinceanera, which is only a 1 day event, for
Yeah.
things that they don't even need.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, yeah. So there's an issue with values, I suppose.
Right. And unfortunately, those values have a lot to do with the Catholic Church. And again, not to demonize the Catholic Church, but um, they don't emphasize on education as much as in Protestant countries, and
Well,
that's the reason.
Lutheranism in particular, education is of huge importance.
Well, of course, of course, of course, but you don't see that. You don't really see that in Catholic countries, and especially like in Latin America. You really see that big gap, and that wide division in terms of rich and poor.
Yeah,
But I really believe that the only way Hispanics can change is that they have to reevaluate their mindset. They have to put their priorities where they need to be, and put value where it needs to be, because
yeah.
that cycle of poverty is never going to break. And I even emphasize this, but before that, if Hispanic people do not make the reforms that I've said many times in many conferences and interviews I've done with different politicians and civil leaders, we're going to have the same problem like we have in Europe, where
Hmm.
you have a native population that is decreasing, and you have an immigrant population that is increasing, that is not assimilated, that does not have the same opportunities as native people. And then that's going to create social instability. Like, I'm seeing it here in the United States, where Hispanics are growing. They're not seeing the same equality in terms of standard of living. And what is happening is that a lot of Hispanics are creating a lot of social instability in different places. So I feel that the only way that, to prevent social unrest in the future, when Hispanics do become a majority in this country, is that they need to have the same standard of living and the same economic privileges that everybody else has. But the only way that's going to happen is that it has to come through education and through reforms, and Hispanics need to be more involved in their local community. It doesn't necessarily have to be politics, but they need to be involved in their community. They cannot be like, my family is what it is. I don't care about my neighbor. That's not my problem. But yet they complain when their neighbors are causing trouble. It's like a community has to work together for the betterment of the community and the betterment of society. Even Jesus himself said it, that you will know who are my disciples, for if you have love for one another.
Hmm. Yeah,
Plain and simple.
it is. It is. By the way, regarding the Protestant emphasis on education, one of the reasons for that, and perhaps the main reason, is because during the Lutheran Reformation, the Holy Scriptures were given to the hoi polloi, to the regular people, whereas the Catholic Church would not allow that until the Second Vatican Council in the early 60s. So 1960s, that is. So for 500 years, the Protestant churches have encouraged people to read the Holy Scriptures for themselves, which unfortunately, of course, then has resulted in splintering of the church, that we have, you know, by some accounts, of over 30,000 Protestant denominations in America today.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them are very small, of course, but and the Lutheran Church is fairly large, 4 million members and so forth. But by comparison to the Catholic Church, of course, it's very small. But yeah, and how do you quickly change that kind of traditions? is certainly a formidable challenge. By the way, I was teaching at California Lutheran University for 6 years. I had to leave that about 10 years ago when I got this current job, and we had a number of Hispanic students at the time, but proportionally wasn't anywhere near what the population, especially in Southern California, is. So we might have at that time, I think 5 to 10% of the student body seemed to be Hispanics. Now these are just figures that are based on my impressions and nothing else. And yes, my hope and prayer is that this can be changed. And Enrique, maybe you are the one to reform the whole Hispanic community.
A lot of people have been saying that they're putting their hopes because it's like they feel that no other leader in the Hispanic community is bringing a message or a mission like I'm doing, which is non-political, non-religious, non-sectarian. It's inclusive of everybody. Like
Yeah.
Spanish United, we have people that are conservative, liberal, religious, not religious. We have Hispanics from all colors, because people think Hispanic is dark and brown. You have Hispanics that are European speaking Spanish. You have African Hispanics that speak Spanish, and also that's another thing. We are inclusive of all Hispanic people, meaning that if you are Hispanic and you are of a different background, that's what matters because Hispanic is not a race, it's a culture, it's a language. It unites, what the model that we have is culture over color, meaning that what matters is culture, not color. And that's, I think, how Spanish has been very successful and growing the way that it has.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I wanted to tell you we're running out of time. The timer came up, but I want to tell you thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it for you taking your time.
Well, thank you, Enrique, and many blessings and good luck with your work. You are certainly doing something very, very important. And I just wanted to tell you that estudió español en Argentina hace 25 años.
Oh, wow. Perfecto.
Desafortunadamente, he olvidado mucho, más mucho. So there is my greeting in Espanol, and I wish I would have continued my studies. I feel handicapped because I love Spanish language. I think it is one of the most expressive languages there is, and you can do so many things with that one that you can't do with many other languages.
Right, right. But it's never too late.
It's never too late. You're absolutely right. Thank you. I need that education.
Anyway, thank you so much for being on the show. And as soon as I'm done here, I will edit and then I will upload it and send you the link and you could share it with everybody else.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right.
Have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.